What's going on, everyone? We've had a couple weeks for Legends of the Force these days, and we gotta return back to the entirety of the set and talk about the top 10 best cards from Legends of the Force. Now they've had time to marinate and actually perform rather than just based on early experience or theory alone. There are definitely some surprises on this list for how well some cards have performed, and there are also surprises that are not on the list because I would have thought they would be. But for the most part, a lot of the cards that we talked about in the past, well, they're on this list and we get to dive into them today. A big thank you to my patrons and anyone who is watching the channel these days. I really appreciate you all, and let's dive into our first one. For our first one, we got Darth Tyranus, 4 cost, 4/3 shielded with, well, when the Force is with you, it's got ambush. So when you look at this base cost without the ambush, you got a 4 resource, 4/3 with shielded. It's not bad. It's got the Force tag. It's okay. It'll work with all your Force synergies, which is very, very prevalent in a lot of decks out there. And this is one of the most played cards in the meta right now, just across a lot of the Villainy Force decks. If you're playing Villainy Force, you are playing Darth Tyranus almost guaranteed. The nice thing about this is you have a couple different situations where this is like could get really gross. For example, let's say you're ambushing into a 2-powered unit. You can actually ambush first before applying the shield and then get the damage or even kill that unit, and then you're off with a 4/1 shielded, which is oftentimes just even better because you'll have multiple attacks where you can get in. But the key part about this is that not only is it a payoff because you're generating the Force and you have a payoff, it's also something that works with all the other cards in your deck and gives you immediate impact on the board early on. Ambushers are extremely strong. 4-cost ambushers are extremely strong. One of the biggest downsides for 4-cost ambushers is they oftentimes die. But Tyranus oftentimes does not die. In fact, will basically never die when he's ambushed out because he has that initial shielded to block any initial damage. This could just be an extremely oppressive unit, not only by taking out a unit early on, but also because if he is left behind as a 4/1 with shielded, it could be multiple attacks to deal with him, and he actually has a reasonable amount of power to actually put pressure onto your opponent afterwards. This guy is fantastic. Next one up is Talzin's Assassin, and I always love when I see comments on the list. It just means that there are some real powerful bangers in the rest of the set outside of spending, $20, $30, $40, $50 on a legendary. We got 4-cost ground unit in Vigilance Villainy, 4/4. When played, you may use the Force. If you do, give the unit -3/-3 for this phase. Very, very similar slot to Darth Tyranus. Both 4-cost units. It's kind of why I kept them earlier together on the list here. But both 4-cost ground units that are going to basically come down and remove a unit and stick around themselves as a 4-powered beater. Now, what's interesting about Talzin's Assassin is you have the uniqueness of being able to give a unit -3/-3 for the phase, which allows you to shrink down a unit to maybe finish it off with another unit that you have on the board, or bypass shields, which is, well, we just talked about the Darth Tyranus that exist. There's also things like Iterant Warrior from the Han Solo decks. There's also things like your random Secretive Sages or your Crafty Smugglers or your L337s. Like there's just so many shielded units, as well as things that giving that -3/-3 to bypass any other, preventing damage, or even like the TIE Phantoms. Well, you can bypass it all. So very, very versatile and extremely powerful when it comes down, and also has the Force tag to continue furthering any Force game plan, which is really, really important. Now, not as universal because it is locked into Vigilance. There are a lot of decks that are going into Force and Vigilance purely for your Talzin's Assassin and your Darth Tyranus. That 4-cost turn is a critical turn for not only Villainy, but also Heroism as a big Force payoff turn, and Talzin's Assassin is one of them. The next one is not just unique to Kylo Ren, and that is Craving Power. 4-cost upgrade, which is awesome to see an upgrade on the list. Command Villainy, you get to attach to a friendly unit, and that's a really key line of text. When played, deal damage to an enemy unit equal to attached unit's power, +2/+2. So the idea behind this is you can attach to something, you're going to get the +2, you're basically guaranteed to get 2 damage out of this thing. But you could put it on leaders, you could put it on, again, any friendly unit, which also includes space units. And this kind of is just a 5-cost removal option that also puts pressure on your opponent, right? So if you are that sort of mid-range value deck, You can just drop this Craving Power. Let's say you're playing Garsax and ECL, which is a very popular one these days. You put it on your Director Krennic as an example. Suddenly it's a 5-powered smack, right? 5 powered or 5 damage coming out from just this upgrade in a color combination that oftentimes doesn't have ways to interact with your opponent. Command Villainy doesn't usually have all that many ways outside of Overwhelming Barrage. That's the key one, of course, but this one is unique in that it can oftentimes be, in some cases, more threatening because it leaves behind this +2/+2 effect permanently. And it can also just, outside of other upgrades that we're seeing commonly, which is like attached to force unit or non-vehicle unit, you can also apply this to your space units, which is also a critical, definite big bonus. Of course, it is also the key upgrade in those Kylo Ren decks, Kylo Ren Data Vault, Kylo Ren ECL. All the green Kylos really do want Craving Power because it means that you can deploy Kylo and have a 7-power damaging hit that basically acts as your leader now is removal if you're putting it in the discard pile from your Kylo's action. So lots of kind of things going with the Craving Power and doing some really good work. Next one on the list is Grand Inquisitor, and there's not a lot that you need for some of these cheap cards to be really strong, and Grand Inquisitor is something that really promotes that thought, which is 3-cost ground unit, aggression, villainy. It's a 3/4, and you might be like, well, that's nothing special, and you would be right. But it's got raid 1, which makes it a 4-powered attacker, which is very important, and then it has hidden and has the force tag. So we've already played in the past 3-resource 3/4 because of the force tag, period. That was good enough just because of the force tag. Now the force tag is much more common these days, so not too much stock in it, but when you get to the 2 and 3 resource slots, you do want a good portion of them. So that is a key part of Grand Inquisitor. When you're talking about like Talzin's Assassin and Darth Tyranus, you need force by that turn. So things like Grand Inquisitor can help you do that. But again, it also attacks for 4, which is really nice. And another key part of this is hidden. And this has been surprisingly a pretty powerful mechanic as you're going along, because there are a lot of the times when you can use this as sort of like an action stall when your opponent has the Talzin's Assassins or the Darth Tyranuses, or maybe just a unit that they're waiting for you to play something to kill your unit. Grand Inquisitor comes down and it basically, can kind of stall out your actions by also using your resources, and that's kind of some of the best ways to utilize them. Of course, you could just play him on turn 2 and he's going to be absolutely excellent, setting you up for those Darth Tyranuses and those Talzin's Assassins while getting in for a good amount of damage. And there are some situations where the friendly Inquisitors gaining hidden matters. Usually you're not playing a ton of other Inquisitors. Fifth Brother is probably the most common one, but Grand Inquisitor just being a 3/4 with raid 1 probably would have been good enough. The hidden's just a little bit of extra spice, and of course, the other things about him, just that's why we were playing him in the first place. Force unit, early cost, etc. Very solid, and a key piece to the aggression force decks in villainy. And the next one we've got is Darth Vader. Now, this one's interesting. Unlike basically every other card that we've talked about before this one, yes, some of them like Darth Tyranus and Talzin's Assassin need the force to be generated, so you technically need other cards in your deck. But Darth Vader really doesn't excel until you start to see things like Xian Flurry or Timely Interventions paired with Darth Vader. So 6-cost ground unit in Vigilance Villainy. It's a 5/6 force unit that says when play, you give shield token to any unit you have and any enemy unit that your opponent has, and then on attack you defeat an enemy unit with a shield token on it. So fail case, you get a 6 resource, 5/6 shielded. That's pretty good. You probably give a shield token to your opponent's unit, which is pretty bad in some cases. But if they have like a space unit, that can be pretty good still. You just attack into their base and you still get to defeat their space unit on the following turn. And I've seen that come into play. I did it against a lot of Han Blues in my matches in the Galactic Championship, where they played Rebellious Hammerhead and I just defeat the Rebellious Hammerhead with the Darth Vader attack on the next turn. But the way this gets insane is when you have Xian Flurry or Time Intervention. And normally, when I'm considering a card, I was like, oh, I need another card to make this card truly powerful. Is it really powerful in of itself? Well, things like Xian Flurry and Time Intervention are actually cards that, normally you would play in your deck already. And Time Intervention, of course, Xian Flurry is new, but Time Intervention has been played in most of the Vigilance Villainy command decks, period, in the past. And so it was no new addition. It was just now you have Timely Vader, which is one of the most oppressive card combinations in the entire game. ECL with Vader obviously is very good. Garsax and ECL is an example that uses Darth Vader in it. Great effect. Of course, things like Kylo UCL were a thing, but usually the Data Vault decks are where we see Vader truly shine. Things like, Iden Data Vault is one, Kira Data Vault, Kylo Data Vault. These decks that can get to the 7 resource mark and then play Vader timely and then kill a unit just because of the attack trigger from Vader and kill another unit while being left with a 5/6 and still preventing a lot of shield shenanigans from happening. It is a incredible card and something that definitely had shifted the game plan and the way a lot of the decks interact. There are a lot of situations where up against a Vigilance Villainy command deck, I just, if you're playing a more space like ground unit hybrid deck, you're like, well, I guess I'm not deploying any ground units in certain sections of the game, or I'm not deploying my leader on the ground because, well, Vader is going to come down and have a target to be able to ambush when he's coming in. And that is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. The next one on our list is Mace Windu, which has been a really quite excellent one, especially in those Anakin lists, but also in the Han lists that exist. It is just an incredible card. 6 cost ground unit in aggression, heroism, 6/6 overwhelm with the force tag, of course. But here's the key part: when you use the force, or when played, you can use the force, and if you do, deal 4 damage to a unit. It's basically the new Wrecker, but you don't have to defeat a resource for it, which is exactly what the more mid-range style of decks want. You want to be able to get to Lukes, you want to be able to get to Great Dragons, that's what you want. And so defeating a resource was, even though Wrecker was good, it was like, that's a really big downside. And so Mace Windu, absolutely incredible card, completely just slots in amazingly at the section of the curve that it's asking for, because in heroism the 6 drops were just not really as exciting, and so you really had great plays on like 5 with like Poe Dameron, and then 7 with like Luke Skywalker as an example. There were some good plays you could play on 6. Obi-Wan was something that people used to play in the past, but Mace Windu slotted in perfectly. And the key factor of this is you get a big body, which is 6/6 overwhelm. Not like incredibly amazing, but it's still solid. Something that your opponents do have to deal with and are threatened by it. And then also comes down and finishes off a unit, kills a space unit. It's not limited to ground units, which is also a very big downside to Wrecker. You have that versatility with Mace Windu, and that makes it absolutely incredible. And of course, if you are playing it with Anakin, which we've seen a lot, you can always pump it up for 2 and overwhelm into the base, which is a nice little bonus on that one too. Next one is Anakin, and this is actually the most played card from set 5. So arguably you could say it is the best card from set 5 in Legends of the Force. And we've got 6 cost ground unit in Vigilance, 5/7 Force Jedi Republic. When played, if there's a heroism card in your discard pile, you may give a unit -3/-3 for this phase, and it is doubled up if there is a villainy card in your discard pile. You can do 2 times -3/-3 across 2 different units or the same unit. So there's so many different things with this, but of course it's one of the most played because it is a strictly vigilance card in that it is not tied to heroism or villainy, which means you have decks like Kylo Ren and Han both playing it. And of course there's many other lists outside of that are playing Anakin with it. But the key factor about this is that, can we enable both parts? If you can enable one, it's good. It's not amazing or absolutely disgusting, but if you're enabling just the heroism or just the villainy side, it is decent. And honestly, it is in some cases worth playing just for that. It's when you're able to enable both parts where this card becomes an absolute disgusting, game-changing card. Again, there are a lot of situations where there's shield tokens, or maybe your opponent is attacked in such a way to where they've kept multiple units alive but with low HP. That's a very common circumstance. Anakin comes down and kills both of them off. This is a game shifter, allows you to keep pace with the board. Of course, in Han decks, you get to play it on 5 resources, which is even more oppressive. But in a lot of situations, some decks are playing an off aspect card just because of Anakin. Now, that off aspect card usually comes down to Ki-Adi-Mundi in heroism, or in, Kylo Ren decks, you can play any heroism upgrade because you just filter it with your action. But in, heroism decks, you're able to play your Force Lightnings, or potentially I've seen Power of the Dark Sides even, but basically just some cheaper interaction or cards that are effective because when you do play those cards, or in some cases you can always force throw yourself if it's like a Ki-Adi-Mundi and you're playing villainy and you are like, oh, force throw, that's 4 damage, that's usually pretty good and enough to kill off early game units. Well, then you can just force throw and put in your discard pile there. And of course you're going to have your primary aspect in your discard pile most of the time, and so this coming down and getting -3/-3 times 2 to stuff, it is disgusting. And again, this is, as of recording this video, the most played card from set 5, and it is an incredibly powerful one. It's good, like I said, when you don't have the double up. When you do, I mean, it's like a cheaper Luke Skywalker that you could spread across 2 units. I mean, what is this? What is it? It's crazy good. Similar to the earlier cards that we talked about in the villainy side of things, 4-drop is a haven for force payoffs in both heroism and villainy, and Ki-Adi-Mundi is one such example. 4-cost ground unit and aggression heroism. It's a 4/4 with the force tag, which is nice. And then we have a when played, you can use the force to draw 2 cards. Now, if you think about this, we have a 4-cost 4/4, which is a little bit below average in stats, but it's still a 4/4 body. And then you have this effect of being able to kind of just play out your game plan, deploying to the board, but then drawing cards to refill your hand. This card has single-handedly shifted the matchups for a lot of aggression heroism decks, because beforehand, if you were playing a more controlling or mid-range deck, you could oftentimes kind of grind out your opponent in that you could, 2-for-1 them, like Overwhelming Barrage or Power the Dark Side, getting some early, trades in with higher, toughness or power units, things like that, right? Or you would, sacrifice potentially a couple of cards in Han's place or whatever it was in the heroism side to put on early aggression, but then you kind of fizzled out because you didn't have enough cards to keep pace. And for example, the Han 2 that we have, the one that gives you a discount, well, that would run out of cards very quickly because you could, get a discount on all your cards, which meant that you could deploy your hand very quickly. This card has made it so that no longer can happen. You draw so many cards in a game with Ki-Adi-Mundi that you oftentimes draw into the cards you need for the matchup, even in the controlling decks, and you could also just continue to put on pressure as a 4/4. And one of the key factors, while this is played in like Anakin's and decks that are not Han 2, Han 2 really takes advantage of Ki-Adi-Mundi because it kind of negates the downside of having a 4 toughness 4-drop. If you think about it, in the past, we would play like Kanan as an example. It's a 4/5. It'd have 5 toughness. And then you'd play it with Han, and it's a 4/3. Well, 4/3s can oftentimes be killed by the same things that 4/2s can in most cases. Things that are coming out on turn 1 these days usually have 3 power. And so when you're playing this on turn 2, a 4/2 or a 4/3 had no difference. So now you get a 4/2, and you get to draw the 2 cards, and it is just incredibly, incredibly disgusting. So definitely one of the top ones. Next one we have is Chirrut. It's a 4-cost ground unit in the Vigilance. It's a 3/5 force with Sentinel. And when it's attacked, you may use the force to shrink down your opponent's or attacker's power. This card has been immensely impressive. And out of any card on this list, this is definitely the one that I was most curious about, and my initial reaction was the lowest on. However, with the rest of the set, and when it had been revealed, Chirrut just crushed. One of the questions I had initially on, and I mentioned this a couple times, was, are we going to get a force synergy? Are we going to get enough force generations to where this becomes a problem? And guess what? We did. When you're playing up against decks that are force-based decks, and you're playing maybe more aggressive or a deck that's looking to get in damage or kill off a unit, this guy comes down and is a brick wall. It is a brick wall. Unless you have a takedown or something to deal directly with Chirrut, it can just stop an offensive in its tracks. Because the problem with this is that you need to have 7 power for you to kill Chirrut in one go when they have the force. And when he comes down, your opponent has like maybe a 2-cost unit or a 3-cost unit. At most, you're getting maybe 4 power on that, 3-cost unit in most games. Sometimes it's a 5-powered unit. A 4-powered unit is only going to deal 2 damage to Chirrut. That's nothing. That means that you're going to have multiple attacks. In fact, if you do have a 4-powered unit, it can't even kill Chirrut in 2 attacks. And in some cases, Chirrut will be able to finish it off. And most importantly, though, is This allows your other units or your other interaction, things like Anakin and Mace Windu and all your other cards or Talzin Assassin, to finish off the units that have been dealt damage by Chirrut. It is super powerful. And this is not to include things that, decks are running entrenched, or, your random constructed lightsabers, or your random Jedi lightsabers on Chirrut. Just any upgrade whatsoever makes this an absolute powerhouse. Some matchups is good, some matchups is of course horrible, but I've seen a lot of matchups where I'm playing an aggressive deck, my opponent gets Chirrut down and puts an entrenched on it. I'm like, all right, I guess I lose, because it's a 6 powered unit with 8 toughness, which means every single attack I do into it, it dies. Even if you were to do something like a Wrecker ECL into Chirrut, guess what? With an entrenched, you are sitting there with, you've dealt 2 damage to your opponent's base, and it traded with Chirrut. Like, that is disgustingly powerful. So yeah, Chirrut has been an absolute brick wall. And as far as the statistics go right now, it is the 3rd most played card in Legend of the Force, besides Anakin and Ki-Adi-Mundi, which are above it. I mentioned this earlier with Grand Inquisitor, but like I said, when you have a cheap card, you don't need a lot to make it really, really strong. And similar to Chirrut, this is I think the 4th most played card, right behind Chirrut as recording. I think a little bit ago it was actually more played than Chirrut, but it's up there as one of the top 4 most played cards of Legends of the Force. And it's just a 2-cost ground unit in Vigilance. It's a 2/2 with shielded. However, the key part of this is that it has the Force tag. We've talked a lot about the cards on this list, like Tyranus, Talzin Assassin, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Mace Windu, all these cards on the list that are just quite excellent, right? But what do they all need? The Force. How do you generate the Force? Well, most decks are running the common base that says when you attack with a Force unit, you generate the Force. Secretive Sage is so perfect for so many reasons. It's, for one, a turn 1 play. That's what you want in those Force decks. But the more you look at Secretive Sage, it fits every single thing you want. So yes, it is a 2-cost 2/2, which is, kind of mediocre stats, but it has that Force tag, and most importantly, it has the shielded tag. That shielded tag means that it's almost guaranteed to live until turn 2. Things like Force Throw, Open Fire, commonly played removal options aren't able to interact with it. The only exception to that is hard removal, which, of course, it's just going to kill anything in shielded. It won't be able to bypass that. But it is doing every single thing that you want for your Force deck. And if you think about the most played decks in the meta right now, any deck that's playing Talzin Assassin is playing Secretive Sage. Any deck that's playing Mace Windu and playing Vigilance is playing Secretive Sage. Any deck that is playing Vigilance at all and is a Force deck is basically playing Secretive Sage, because it is a great turn 1 play that can enable those Force synergies and survives in most cases. This is another such common where it's like, again, it's cheap. It doesn't really do anything special. It's very similar to that Crafty Smuggler in the past. In fact, if you are a deck that wanted Crafty Smuggler, you're going to want Secretive Sage as well. That's the same sort of logic for the most part. Just a 2/2 shielded, it's kind of hard to deal with, but most importantly, it's early Force enabling, and that is the key. And that was the top 10, but I wanted to mention a couple of honorable mentions, starting off with Grogu here. I didn't put Grogu on the list because while some of these decks are, some of the cards that we mentioned are specifically for Force decks, Grogu is specifically for one leader, and that is Han 2. If you're playing it outside of Han 2, he's kind of like, meh. Not that great, but in Han 2, he's absolutely incredible. In some matchups, it is just game changing. He is incredibly good because you can play him on turn 1, start healing up him as well as any other unit in the future, and just start picking off your opponent's units, which is absolutely amazing. Another great one is Itinerant Warrior, and this is another one that just has been absolutely fantastic in Han also, but another one that's just any Vigilance, heroism Force deck has just been really, really solid. The biggest thing with the Itinerant Warrior is that it doesn't need to have that when played to be good, and that's something that's been really, really awesome for the card. Is you play it, you can heal, of course that's fantastic when you're trying to get to later in the game, but you could also just play it and it's a shielded unit. 4/4, it's going to be reasonable, right? It's going to be reasonable. Same with Darth Tyranus. These two that I want to mention, Yaddle and Adi Gallia, are both things that I wanted to mention. Both of them are good. Oh, of course I spelled with one L and it's not showing up. Both of them are absolutely great because they are just early units that you just drop onto the board, and they're, they have 4 toughness. They're 2/4s. It doesn't really matter what their ability does. I tend to like Yaddle a little bit more because of the restore, but again, it doesn't really matter what they do. They're just early force enablers similar to Secretive Sage, and they're very tanky, but they're not as survivable as Secretive Sage most of the time. Of course, you could mention all sorts of other things. Ogdo Bogdo is a great mention. It's really good in a lot of decks. Han Blue, of course. Ezra Bridger is another one. Karis, Shatterpoint, Gunji. There are so many played cards. Like, if you look back on the old sets as an example, and like cards that we would consider some of the best cards of the previous sets, things like Maw, or things like Ruthless Raider, or No Glory Only Results, or Surprise Strike, or Super Laser Technician. All of these cards, that I'm mentioning in the honorable mentions, are up there with some of the most played cards in the sets in general, like Super Laser Technician, which is crazy to think about. And this is a brand new set. So yeah, and part of the reason that is, and the reason why some of these are in honorable mentions, is that some of the cards must be played because you need to be working with the Force if you're using a Force deck, and which means you're kind of relegated to use a lot of set 5 Force cards. And so, yes, that is a consideration. But some of these, like I said, just have some incredible payoffs. Some of them are Force related, like we mentioned earlier with Talzin Assassin, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and some of them are not, like Darth Vader, Grand Inquisitor, Craving Power, all don't require the Force. So there's definitely a kind of a split, half and half in terms of half of them are just good because they're Force payoffs, and then the other half are good because they are just solid cards in of themselves or have some incredible potential with some other cards out there in the meta. And let me know if there's anyone that I missed. I know some of these honorable mentions, you could argue that like Grogu should be on the list, even though it just works in Han. I mean, Han is one of the best decks in the format. That, you could just say Grogu is one of the best cards from Legends of the Force. I totally would understand that argument. And it's definitely worth at least an honorable mentions. I could mention Yoda on here, which I don't think is actually performed all that well, or even Yoda's lightsaber for Sabine. There are so many cards that are like, dang, this card's actually really good and fits perfectly within what this deck wants to do, that we don't even have enough slots on the list, which is surprising because most decks in the past, or most sets in the past, when I'm making these lists, I'm looking through all the cards and I'm like, what's a good last couple of cards to add? There's like usually 7 or 8 cards that immediately jump out to me, and then their last 2 or so, I kind of look through the list. I'm like, oh, these both are pretty good. Should I put this one on the list or this one? And to be honest, I was battling out for this one. What should be the top 10? Because there's like 20 cards that I could mention, not just on the card statistics alone, but also just in terms of playing out the game. Some of these cards are just so much more powerful than we've seen in the past. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below, and I will see you all for a video tomorrow.